It's 3 o'clock on the dot. Again, I know we have a very packed schedule, so I would like to keep us on time. And so we're now officially beginning the poster sessions. So poster sessions will happen between 3 and 4 o'clock. And so we'll have a series of presenters. Each presenter will discuss their poster for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move into a Q&A again for 5 more minutes. If you have any questions, please add them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them during the Q&A element of the presentation. And if you have comments or kudos or anything you'd like to share about the presentation or the presenter, feel free to add that to the chat. So I will pass it over to Aspen Dyer. They are an undergraduate student, sociology major, and they will be talking about women's healthcare in the U.S. military, the realities of historical gender discrimination. So thank you, Aspen.
All right, hi. I am actually a graduate student. I think that was just a typo, but yes.
Yeah, so sorry. My apologies. I'm a graduate student. Thank you for correcting me.
No, that's okay. So this was a project. It's basically a literature review with a little bit of a discussion. It's about women's healthcare in the U.S. military. So to begin, we see this chart in the middle, and it's women's representation by service and rank in 2018. And so we see the highest proportion of women in the military is 23% in the Coast Guard. So as we see that this is primarily a male-dominated institution, that there are not as many women as there are men. And this is in part due to a historical exclusion and lack of recognition of women in the US military that existed until 1948. So women were a part of the US military for many years before 1948, but it wasn't until then that they gained recognition as members of the US military. Today, we see that nearly 300,000 women currently serve in the US military, and 97% of those women are within reproductive ages. So as a result, we see a lot of issues like unintended pregnancy and other reproductive health considerations that can affect troop readiness and women's military careers. So it is important to study how women have access to different healthcare that are specific to them, because the military was not initially created with women in mind. So when we look at the literature review, we see that 67% of menstruating women experience work disruption due to difficult menses cycles. And this can also include exacerbations of medical issues like asthma, migraines, anxiety, things like that that are common. This is important when we're looking at the US military because it can affect the troop as a whole and their ability to complete a mission. And then additionally in the way that women service members are perceived. So a lot of birth control options help suppress regular menses, and that can help with unmanageable symptoms that we're looking at above. However, birth control is often not accessible in the military, or there's a stigma attached to asking for it. So for instance, requesting medical appointments can be viewed as a way of shirking responsibilities, and medical requests have to be made through a chain of command. So female service members can be uncomfortable in addressing their often male superiors because there's this stigma of, not fitting into this male-dominated system. And so as a result, when we look at the discussion, the military is a male-dominated institution that was created without women-specific healthcare needs in mind. So women service members have to work hard to earn respect and be perceived as capable as their male counterparts. And this can be difficult when they don't have access to appropriate healthcare, and that could prevent their ability to accurately complete their jobs. And so the effects of this female exclusion historically is seen today, wherein males hold the majority of these leadership roles. And as a result, majority of resources exist solely for male service members. So another way that we see that they're existing solely for male service members is that research says that military healthcare often lacks comprehensive training in women's specific needs. So again, it's just another way that we have to pay attention to how women don't fit in within this system, and they're an invisible population there. So this leads me to some policy recommendations, basically that we need to put more emphasis on access to women's healthcare and birth control specifically. And birth control should be deemed essential healthcare that's offered in preliminary health screenings within the military, so that women don't have to go through their chain of command to request things like birth control that can help. Additionally, access to birth control should be available without prescription, just to help eliminate those barriers and the stigma that women have to experience in order to gain the healthcare that they need. So in an organization that I've looked at that have kind of helped draw attention to this issue is IBIS Reproductive Health. They conduct and compile research to address sexual and reproductive healthcare needs for females in the military. And specifically, they address service women and how they may be unable to access things like contraception, things like unintended pregnancy and abortion policies. And it's just basically bringing awareness to invisible populations like women in the military who may not have a voice to speak up on their own. And that's basically end of my presentation. If you have any questions, it was mainly just a literature review, but it would be interesting to expand on this issue in future research. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Aspen. Appreciate that. It's really helpful. I think it's eye-opening in that sense of that women's health wasn't like really the forefront of folks' thoughts, and maybe even still now. So I love your recommendations that you provided. And like you said, this is kind of a start of your literature review, and hopefully you continue on with this research.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I see there's a question, I think in the chat. So what inspired you to conduct research in this area?
Yeah, so this was initially just for a project for a class that I took last semester. And I've been very interested in sexual health and reproductive health, but the military was not an area I had initially looked into. So I just, was kind of doing some research, and I found there's actually a lot of articles about, people struggling to gain accurate healthcare and birth control. And so I just kind of went from there, and I'm actually expanding on further research in my thesis within the US military. So it is, I feel like, an interesting population to look at.
Perfect, thank you for that. Other questions for Aspen and her research? Great job, Aspen. It's important research. Thank you for doing the hard work. Absolutely. Aww. Other things. Was anything surprising as you were doing your literature review?
Maybe just like as deep as it goes. I don't think that I ever really thought of the women's specific healthcare needs that aren't being addressed, and things like how menstrual cycles can affect productivity and things like that men don't have to think about. And so I think that that's often not at the forefront of discussions. So
yeah, it's very deep. You're right. I appreciate that historical context that you provided even in your presentation. We do have another question. It says, did you find any information about disparities of race in class in your study?
Yeah, I didn't focus a whole lot on that, specifically in just what I presented today. There definitely are, as we know, that intersection between different races. Some people don't have as much of a voice to speak up as others, but it wasn't something that I super delved into specifically into this research.
Makes sense. Other questions or comments for Aspen? All right. Anything else you'd like to share, Aspen?
No, that's good. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for being our first presenter. This is actually the first time we're doing a poster session. So you're the first ever HSS virtual poster session presenter. So thank you for doing this. It's a unique platform, but we still wanted to be able to allow you all to highlight your research that you've done. So thank you, Aspen. I'll put you back as an attendee and I'll bring in the next presenter. Hi,
Hello.
Lacey. Hi, Lacey. Thank you for joining
Hello.
us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, feel free to share your screen if you like. I'll do some introductions for you. So today, our next poster session presenter is Lacey Guzman. They're an undergraduate student majoring in women and gender studies. And today they'll be just talking about Invisible Mom, navigating motherhood in higher education. So Lacey, whenever you're ready.
Okay. It is loading. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This is, a little overview of my paper, Invisible Mom, Navigating Motherhood in Higher Education. I am a mom of 3 myself, so this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. When I started doing the research for this paper, I noticed that mothers in academia are a fairly understudied group in general, and most of the research that's out there either focused on graduate student mothers or it focused on mothers who were faculty. There was very, very little on undergraduate student mothers specifically. And at first I wondered if this was because there just weren't very many of us, because it's been my experience that I'm often one of the only, if not the only, mother in my classes. But then I happened upon this report from 2014 by the Institute of Women's Policy Research that actually says that there's 3.4 million undergraduate student mothers and approximately 5 million student parents, which led me to my research question: why are universities not investing more in student mothers' success if we make up such a sizable proportion of the student population? So I decided to do this as an autoethnography because I think that it gives a really rich and nuanced understanding of my specific challenges and challenges that are probably faced by a significant amount of student mothers. And while I realize that, you can't generalize off one person's experience, I think this is a good starting off point along with other studies like this to see really where we can begin to change policies and practices to provide an equitable experience for student mothers. So I did this through social reproduction theory and standpoint theory. Social reproduction theory essentially discusses the tremendous burden that is disproportionately placed on women in home and how we tend to invisibilize them into the home. And while I think that the society realizes that women don't belong just at home like we used to think, that some of our institutions, such as universities, haven't quite caught up to that idea. And standpoint theory, which just discusses how knowledge is socially situated, and our knowledge as women in particular comes from where we stand within society. So when I analyze these moments, I tried to pick some really key moments and policies that affected my ability to succeed in my education. And through that, I tried to come up with some potential solutions, which I realize autoethnography is not typically the place for providing solutions, but I think that this is something that there's some pretty key things that we can do that would help millions of undergraduate student mothers. So first and foremost, we need affordable childcare that's also accessible. We need to have a spot for every student's children, whether it's on university campuses or whether it is through an affiliated daycare or preschool. And it needs to either be free or income-based because it is way out of the realm of possibility for a lot of students to be able to afford what it costs to put our kids in childcare. Lactation rooms for postpartum mothers that where there's more than one, and then there's more than just a chair and a plug. And then also more robust course offerings outside of prime instruction time, evenings once a week, online classes, and then an understanding and a willingness to accommodate to mothers and pregnant women's needs, because it is a very unique set of needs and circumstances, and just a willingness to accommodate to that when those are needed, I think would be very helpful. I think future directions, I think looking at a larger percentage of student mothers to see what they need. I think that the things that I propose in this paper would help a significant portion of student mothers, but obviously every everyone's life circumstances are different and they might need different things. So that's about all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Lacey.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Did anything, you know, you said this topic is near and dear to your heart. As you were conducting your research, did anything stand out that was surprising or something new that you kind of hadn't thought of before?
Yeah, actually, when I was looking at the lactation room policy, it wasn't until last year in California that universities were even required to provide lactation rooms at all. And it only requires Cal State and the community colleges, and it strongly suggests that the UC systems offer that. So that wasn't even a thing that we felt that students needed to do, which meant that moms were pumping in their cars between classes or in bathrooms or wherever they could find a spot to do it before that.
Yeah, and you said a comment earlier about having more than just like I think you said just more than a chair there in the room.
Yes, legally you have to provide a chair and a plug, and that's it. And I looked when before COVID, I was going to need one of those lactation rooms, and nobody knew where it was or had any idea that we even had those or where they might be and how you might sign up for them. And it took me an hour just to find it on Fullerton's website where that might even be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I hear that among colleagues as well. So students and colleagues alike. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Do folks feel free to add comments in the chat and questions in the Q&A box. We're happy to take them and Lacey can then answer them. Did you find any differences in, you know, I know your research is new and we're literally in a pandemic still, the differences in, you know, your topic in regards to like being in person versus this virtual time?
I haven't actually, there's very little on this topic in general. And I didn't see, there's some on, you know, allowing a flexibility virtual in a virtual platform that you don't on campus, but that's not actually something that I found much about, no.
Thank you. I see a comment come through. Great job, Lacey. Mothers are one of the most underappreciated, undersupported people in the world. Thank you for, thankful you are doing this research and hoping for more changes in how we can support mothers in all spheres of life. Yes.
Thank you. I agree. My goal is to get mothers into education because I've gotten a lot of comments just like, wow, I don't know how you do it. And it really shouldn't be that hard. Having kids shouldn't mean that you can't pursue your dreams.
Absolutely. We have so many students who are parents. Absolutely. And I think finding that community amongst one another is so critical as well.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lacey. I don't see any other questions coming through. But folks do feel free. But thank you so much, Lacey. Again, appreciate this topic. So timely, so important for all of our students. So I'm going to put you back as an attendee and then we'll bring in the next presenter.
Hello.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Feel free to share your screen if you like and get set up for your presentation. And then I'll just kind of highlight that you'll be our next poster session presenter. You're an undergraduate student, psychology major, minor in cell and molecular biology. And today you're going to be talking about how attitudes about casual sex influence judgment of rape victims and perpetrators and an experimental test of the reproductive morality model. So I will pass it over to you, Soren.
Great, thank you, Doctor. So as Dr. Moreno Yamashiro just said, today I'll be presenting a project led by Rebecca Hannell-Peters and Dr. Getz about how attitudes about casual sex influence judgments of rape victims and perpetrators. And to start off, I'll tell you about the traditional model, which has claimed over time that religiosity and political orientation are the factors that are typically responsible for attitudes towards reproductive issues such as abortion and contraception. However, the reproductive morality model that we'll be looking at today instead suggests that perceptions of others' behavior interfering with one's own reproductive strategies are responsible for shaping religiosity, political orientation, and the aforementioned attitudes towards controversial social issues. Now, reproductive strategies refer to long-term versus short-term mating, and in general, we see a sex difference such that men typically lean towards a more short-term mating psychology, whereas women lean towards a more long-term mating psychology. And this can be explained by the parental investment theory by Robert Trivers. However, it should be noted that both men and women are capable of using both types of strategies, and that their use of these strategies will often change over the course of their lifetimes. With that being said, because long-term versus short-term mating are different strategies, they do use different tactics in order to be successful. So for those who are more of long-term maters, we expect to see them use strategies that dissuade others from engaging in promiscuous sexual behavior. One such tactic that they might use is rape myths, and rape myths refer to any sorts of false, stereotyped, or prejudiced beliefs that push the blame of rape onto the victim as opposed to on the perpetrator. And in a meta-analysis by Suarez and Dyer, it was found that rape myth acceptance positively correlates with a number of characteristics, and one of those is more condemnation of sexual permissiveness, which was especially relevant to our current study. And in our current study, we were aiming to experimentally test rape myth acceptance as predicted by attitudes towards third-party casual sex. So in our first hypothesis, we proposed that interaction between sex and ambiguity of rape vignette was moderated by attitudes towards others' casual sex, such that participants who condemned others' casual sex would present no difference in judgment of victims' culpability across rape vignettes. And then for our second hypothesis, we predicted differences in culpability judgments, such that participants who condemn others' casual sex would present lower difference scores between judgments of victims and perpetrators compared to participants who do not condemn casual sex. And in our methods, we used a survey for our participants, and one of the items was a composite variable of these two following items, basically used to gauge whether the participants were more condemning or more accepting of third-party casual sex on a Likert type scale. Additionally, demographic information of the participants was collected, and some of that is summarized in this table below. Afterwards, participants read a series of 4 different vignettes with the ambiguous and unambiguous rape scenarios counterbalanced against each other, followed by scenarios of theft and robbery, both of which were distractor items. After reading each vignette, participants answered a series of 4 different questions to see how culpable they thought of the perpetrator was and how culpable they thought the victim was on a sliding scale from a completely negative answer as seen on the left to a completely positive answer as seen on the right. So for our results in the first hypothesis, we found that in the robbery scenario, the victim culpability ratings were not that different regardless of the attitudes towards casual sex. However, this greatly changed in the rape scenarios such that those who are more condemning of third-party casual sex tended to rate the victims as much more culpable in the rape, versus those who are more accepting of third-party casual sex who rated the victims as much less culpable. Then for our second hypothesis, we found that in general, all participants rated the perpetrator as more culpable than the victim in the rape scenarios. However, for those who are more condemning of third-party casual sex, we saw that they rated the victims and the perpetrators as more similarly culpable, regardless of how ambiguous the rape scenario was. In contrast, for those who are more accepting of third-party casual sex, we saw that perpetrators were rated as much more culpable and the victims as much less culpable, especially as the ambiguity of the rape decreased. So from our study, we concluded that attitudes towards third-party casual sex do in fact predict how culpable the victim is seen in a rape scenario, such that those who are more condemning of third-party casual sex tend to rate the victim as more culpable, regardless of how ambiguous the rape was. And in contrast, those who are more accepting of third-party casual sex tend to rate the victim as much less culpable and the perpetrator as much more culpable, especially as the ambiguity of the rape decreases. So some limitations of our study were the smaller sample size and the liberal population, both of which contributed to the rather non-random and non-representative sample. So with this in mind, we would like to expand our data by collecting more of it on prolific and diversifying our samples so that our findings can be better generalized. Additionally, we would like to expand our experimental design to different moral domains so that we're able to see how well the reproductive morality model is able to predict attitudes in other areas such as drug use, prostitution, and abortion. All right, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soren. Appreciate that. Really thorough presentation.
Yes, it was a lot to cover.
No, yeah, you did a great job in the 5 minutes that you had, so great, kudos. Was anything, feel free again, add to the Q&A box for your questions, add comments to the chat. Did anything stand out while conducting this research?
Yeah, so it was just the challenge of creating this project in the first place was really interesting just because we are trying to experimentally test this model. And the thing about it is that we can't ethically or even viably change how people's mating strategies vary, right? Because it's just a function of like their own personal preferences and what works for them. And so it wouldn't be ethical to do so. So the way that we had to go about this was to use these rape vignettes and modify the number of rape myths that were present in them to see how people react when placed in a certain scenario.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I see another question come through. Why do you believe there is a relationship between views of third-party sex and rape victim culpability?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so it all goes back to the reproductive strategies that we use in order to be successful. And the thing is that when we're talking about the influence of these mating strategies, it's very much an unconscious perception that influences like our behavior as opposed to something that's conscious. So views of third-party sex give us an insight into the participants' own mating strategies, such as if they are more condemning of third-party casual sex, they themselves most likely are not interested in doing such a thing, and vice versa for those who are more accepting of third-party casual sex. And in that sense, we can kind of see based on that, or we can predict from that, how likely they are to use tactics such as rape myth acceptance. And some types of rape myths include those that, again, push the blame onto the victim as opposed to the perpetrator, making it therefore more costly for it to engage in casual sex just because there is a blur between consensual versus coercive sex, thereby lumping the two in the same category and making both of them seem morally dubious. I don't know if that answered your question because it's a lot, but yeah.
No, that's good. Thank you. What drew you to this topic? Can you just talk about that a little?
Yeah, actually, so this is a project led by one of our master's students, and I was just like one of the RAs helping on the project. And I just think it's really important to look behind what's driving rape myth acceptance because these myths are harmful to rape victims and potential victims. And in order to combat them, I think it's really important that we are able to understand where they're coming from so that first off, we can establish that these rape myths are false. And secondly, to understand what we can do to further our awareness of preventing this acceptance, however unconscious or conscious, and also to just let people know that if they are at risk at rape myth acceptance, whether that is to their own detriment or to another's, that they can change their biases.
Thank you for that. Anything else you'd like to share?
No, that is it. Thank you so much for listening.
No, thank you for presenting and sharing your research. Sounds like you're probably extended a little bit, maybe. I know that's a master's student's topic, but continue to work on that.
Yes.
Sounds good. I will add you back as an attendee, and then I'll bring in the next presenter. Thank you.
Hello.
Tracy, welcome to the poster session.
Hi.
Hi, feel free to share your screen. Yeah, when you're ready, take your time.
Hi.
I'd like to officially formally introduce you, Tracy Nguyen, undergraduate student, major in psychology, and they will be talking about You Shall Not Pass or Will You? A look into student-instructor rapport and its effects on face-to-face versus online classrooms. So I'll pass it over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Hello. Nice speaking to you all. So this is my poster presentation, You Shall Not Pass or Will You? And I actually divided it up into PowerPoint slides because this text is pretty small. But so moving into our introduction, with the progression of COVID-19, students have been forced to migrate into online learning platforms. But this raises several concerns because according to previous literature, online students tend to get lower grades and withdraw more compared to students who attend class traditionally. And this may be due to online courses failing to give opportunities for interpersonal communication between professors and students, also known as student-instructor rapport. We wanted to see if there was a relationship between student-instructor rapport and student engagement. Therefore, our hypothesis states that student-instructor rapport will be a stronger predictor of student engagement in online courses compared to student engagement in traditional classroom settings. And if our hypothesis is supported, then we should see evidence that higher rapport goes hand in hand with higher engagement, and that this correlation should be higher for students who take classes online. So for our method section, the sample size for our study was 1,743 students. 1,334 of them were female and 472 were male. The participants consisted of students who enrolled in a sociology class in Bain College in the University, it's not a university, Community College of Texas. And then we grouped the students by racial category too. 711 were Caucasian and 1,026 were identified as an ethnic minority. For the responses or the course method, we had 302 students who took the class online and 1,465 students take it in class. And each student filled out a questionnaire that consists of 3 different scales. And then, so for our independent variable, our independent variable was the course method, whether it was taken online or in class, and our dependent variable was average course engagement. The scores from the questionnaire scales were averaged to calculate an average course engagement total score, and we ran multiple regression analysis in order to obtain our results. So for our results, we found that we use the Pearson correlation is actually higher for online students. For online students, it's 0.36 compared to 0.31 for on-campus students. The R is higher for Caucasian students, and the R is also higher for female students. And so a higher Pearson correlation means that higher rapport is positively associated with higher engagement. So going into our discussion, was our hypothesis supported by the data that we collected? Yes, it does. Our study suggests that not only does instructor rapport predict student engagement within traditional classrooms, but it is also an even stronger predictor for student engagement in online courses. But our study also had several limitations. Out of our sample size, only 302 students were actually online students, and we had a huge gender skew in our participants. 1,334 were female students. And I also think that we should have separated ethnic minorities into separate groups because different cultures can affect perceptions of academic concept and student engagement. At the end of our study, it leaves the door open for several implications. One that struck me while I was looking at the data is, why does rapport not correlate as strongly with engagement for students who identify as an ethnic minority? And so this begs into the question, like, how can we make classrooms more engaging for students of different cultures? Because we see that student-instructor rapport doesn't seem to be as motivating. So what other factors are motivating then? And lastly, also, how can we increase student-instructor rapport in an online setting? Should we get rid of asynchronous classrooms? Should we have more office hours? Should we have more discussion in lecture? Should professors give students their phone numbers so they're always available? Should they let their students text them? And I just find that there's a lot to learn more about online classroom learning. Thank you. Leave the floor open for any possible questions that you guys might have.
Thank you, Tracy. Your research is so timely, obviously, right now, given that most of the classes this semester and many next semester will be virtual still.
Yeah.
I don't know if I missed it in the beginning, but can you explain like the rationale in online learning and stronger rapport with their instructors?
Well, according to the previous literature, traditional classrooms had been studied to have higher, like a relationship between student instructor rapport in traditional classrooms. So we wanted to see if that relationship was still apparent in online classrooms as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Perfect. And again, folks, feel free to add your questions into the Q&A box and comments in the chat. I do see, great job, Tracy. How were your virtual learning experiences similar or different from the research results?
I personally don't feel like they are that different than my research results, because I personally feel that I tend to engage more in classrooms where I feel like the professor has like a stronger connection to me compared to classrooms that the teacher's not very present, they don't reply quickly, and so I feel less motivated to be engaged within that classroom as well. So my personal experience really aligns with what I found in like my research. I see like a question in the Q&A. Do you think the communication between the students themselves can have an effect? I think that it definitely does. And I think that's why there is a difference between online classrooms and face-to-face classrooms, because in face-to-face classrooms, you have that social facilitation effect where you're in a classroom with several other students and you guys are all building off each other's energies. And so that might increase student engagement in a traditional classroom, but you don't have that in an online classroom. So that's why that I believe that student engagement is more contingent on student instructor rapport in an online classroom setting.
Thank you for that. You kind of alluded to this in the first question you answered, but have your findings influenced the way you've engaged in your own classroom? I see that in the chat.
I definitely try to make an effort to reach out to my instructors more, like try to attend their office hours, and try to send out their office hours. And also, like whenever I go to office hours too, I try to ask them how are they doing, or like what did you do for your spring break or something. Try to make it a little bit more personal, because like having that personal connection actually helps amplify your learning experience as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, very true. You said earlier that that rapport was helpful when instructors showed that they cared or responded more promptly to emails. Are there other things that from your experience, either through your research or your own personal experience, that you think would be helpful for instructors to do to help build that rapport with students?
I think not necessarily. I think also just the way that instructors treat their students, like just like be careful about the language that you use. Try to always have positive, unconditional positive regard to all your students, because you never know where they're coming from, what they're going through. So just never assume like the worst in your students, and always assume that they're trying their best. I think keeping that in mind helps a lot with like building that student instructor rapport.
I love that. Always assuming that they're trying their best. I absolutely agree. Love it. Gabby loves that too. Yes. Anything else, y'all? Or Tracy, anything else you'd like to share?
That's about it. If you guys have any other questions.
Such good research. So again, so timely and so applicable to where we're at. So I appreciate that you're Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
go ahead.
I did want to say that it was so unfortunate because this questionnaire was collected in 2019 before most people had that mass migration over to online settings. So I think that contributed to why there was so little online students in the actual study, because like at that point, people were going to on like campus classrooms way more than online classrooms. Yeah. But I think that actually leaves like well, we don't really have a lot of research on how online classrooms affects like the actual learning process. We don't even know if it's really truly effective or not. So I do think that there needs to be a lot more research and literature about how like learning through Zoom, learning through like a computer and like the working environment affects like your actual academic journey.
Absolutely. It's brought that to light during this pandemic.
Yeah.
It made me think of another question of, having the research done before, that like even though it was done before, it's still really helpful to have that now, especially because we're in this virtual time. So
Yeah.
even though the participants weren't as many taking online classes, I think the information and the results and the implications from your research are still really applicable.
Yeah, and it makes me excited because, I mean, of course, COVID-19 is not a great period of history, but it actually will prompt people to learn more about the effects of online learning now. I definitely think that we're gonna really be talking about this like in the next like 5 years, 10 years or so.
Yeah, and you could definitely have opportunities to continue this research should you want to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
I
very
definitely
cool.
want to do like another one where maybe the online courses is equal to the amount of traditional classrooms. Yeah.
That'd be good. All right, Tracy, thank you so much for sharing your poster and doing the slides. We didn't ask that of you, so I appreciate you putting that extra effort. So I'll put you back as an attendee, and then we'll bring in the next presenter. So great
Thank
job.
you so much.
Hello.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks for joining us. You're officially our last poster session for the day. And so you'll bring us home with the poster session. Feel free to share your screen whenever you're ready. And we'll do some introductions. I want to make sure I pronounce your name right. Can you say that? Say your name for me.
Yeah, my name is Zahra Tahmasebi. Zahra.
Oh, I love Sarah. Sarah?
Zara, yeah.
Zara, perfect. Thank you so much, Zara. So Zara is a graduate student in psychology, and they will be talking about perceiving wrongness of unintended harm caused by distracted driving. Again, another important topic. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. So I conducted this study with my advisor, Professor Novarik. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And first of all, I want you to imagine that you're sitting in a coffee shop, and as you're having your morning coffee, you're looking at the busy intersection close to the coffee shop. As you're looking, you see that the traffic light turns red, and you see a car getting closer to the intersection and passes the red light. How do you morally judge the driver's action? Does that make a difference if you know that the driver was driving drunk, or if you see that a pedestrian is killed because of this accident? So moral judgment is a natural capacity that evolved as a tool to enhance social harmony, but sometimes it can give rise to intense conflicts. I believe that knowing the underlying process of moral judgment can help us have less biased judgments and fairer decisions. People tend to morally judge an action by considering both the agent's intention and the harmful consequences. So the same harmful consequences is usually, when is intended, is usually judged as more wrong than when it is not intended. So how is it in the absence of intention? In this study, We looked into a broad range of harmful consequences to see how severity of harmful consequences can have an effect on our moral judgment when the harm is unintentional. So we had different varieties of the scenario that I told you about: a distracted driver who goes through the red light in a busy intersection and cause different levels of harm. So we had no collision, just annoyance. We had collision and property damage. We had causing injury and or killing a pedestrian. For each of these harm levels, we had 10 forms of distraction conditions varying in degrees of responsibility, such as just glancing at a billboard or driving drunk. In an online survey, our participants rated from 0 to 5 how morally wrong they felt it was for the driver to cause this situation. And here are the results. So both harm and distraction had significant overall effects on perceived wrongness. So with more severe harm, more severe levels of harm had caused higher ratings of wrongness, as did distractions with higher degrees of responsibility as they were foreseeable. So looking first at a spontaneous distraction, glancing at a billboard, there is a main effect of harm as shown by the slope here. Then looking at a distraction with a foreseeable distraction, looking at a notification on the cell phone. The ratings of wrongness are higher, but the similar slope here shows a similar effect with this one of harm effect. But now look, how was driving drunk? This action is both foreseeable and reckless, and a shallow slope here across levels of harm shows a very small effect of harm. So this pattern of relationship can also be seen having all of our 10 distraction conditions involved. So we could cluster our distraction conditions into different groups based on their similarity of ratings of wrongness. So we had spontaneous, foreseeable here, foreseeable with one wheel on the hand, one hand on the wheel, sorry, and foreseeable and reckless. So these results suggest that there are independent appraisal processes for harm and for action. And questions related to each of these appraisal processes need to be considered, such as what done the action was done for. Was it for pleasure or was it for necessity? Because we see a difference in ratings of alcohol versus driving under the effects of a medication. Or we can ask how beyond the social norm it went for the action, as we see in just looking at the notification on the cell phone versus using the cell phone for the whole trip. So in general, we could conclude that judgments of wrongness of unintended harm increase with the amount of harm done when the action itself is not grossly reprehensible. And so violating a culture's norm could be offensive, even though if it was understood as unintentional, and being culturally aware can avoid such conflicts. So that is my presentation, and thank you for listening. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, thank you, Zara. It looks like we do have a question. Great presentation. Have you also looked at the identity of the driver? For example, the driver being male or female, or its possible effects on judgments?
Of course, that's a very good question. Actually, research shows that the details about the character of the agent in such moral scenarios can have an effect on our moral judgment. So details about their gender, their ethnicity, or even physical appearance can have an effect. But and also genderless, raceless agents in such moral scenarios can actually bring up some, so the participant might be assigning a gender character to the participants themselves. But because it wasn't the focus of this study, we didn't focus on that, and we keep that raceless and genderless, but that absolutely will be a very influential factor on our moral judgment.
Perfect, thank you. And then the last question that came in is, what made you interested in this topic?
As I mentioned, I think it is really important to know the underlying processes of our moral judgment, because moral judgment itself is a natural process, but what causes many conflicts is that they are usually biased. And knowing the factors that influence our moral judgment can help us to manipulate those factors, and help us to base our moral judgment on appropriate facts, not on biases or on stereotypes. And that is why I think this kind of research can actually help us to avoid such conflicts in the society.
Thank you. I know we're at our time. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, that was it. Thank you so much. And thanks to HSS for this opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone in the audience. This is our last poster session for the day. We will be taking it looks like a 9-minute break. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll start up back with our concurrent session. So we have a session A and session B. If you're here wanting to see session A presentation, stick around here. And if you're looking for session B, you can hop over to that session as well. So again, we'll be taking a quick break and we'll be back at 4 o'clock. Thank you.